Hello and welcome back to science class. My name is Elio. This is The Florist, where I sit on the floor and talk about science. In today's video, we'll be talking about if you should meet your heroes or not, Jon Snow edition, the scientist, not the guy from Game of Thrones. I don't know anything about him, so go ask somebody else. All right, let's get into it. Jon Snow was born in 1813 to a working-class family in York, England, which already makes him statistically unlikely to be the next big scientist because Victorian England was only a meritocracy if you ignored all of it. He was apparently always into medicine and even apprenticed with a surgeon when he was 14, which is crazy to me because I don't think I had my first intelligent thought until I was like 17 at least. As a young medical trainee, he got sent to treat coal miners during a cholera outbreak, and he immediately noticed something super weird. The disease seemed to be linked to where people got their water. That might not seem weird to you or me, but to him it was really weird because before the mid to late 1800s, germ theory wasn't a thing, and instead people thought disease was spread by spooky bad air, or miasma. This is why people would carry around a pocket full of posies, like in the Ring Around the Rosie nursery rhyme, because A, it covered up the stink of bad hygiene, and B, people believed that if they avoided or filtered this bad air, they would avoid getting illnesses like cholera and the plague. This belief is also where the word malaria comes from, mal meaning bad and aria meaning air, because people thought that the disease was caused by the allegedly noxious fumes coming from swamps, marshes, and bogs, when in reality those places just happened to be mosquito breeding grounds. All this to say, miasma theory was everywhere and was widely accepted at the time. Victorian medicine especially was obsessed with miasma. The idea that diseases floated around in like spooky, stinky fog, and if something smelled bad, doctors were like, yes, evil vapors. And Snow was like, that's stupid, respectfully, or actually disrespectfully. So flash forward to 1854, where a brutal cholera outbreak is sweeping through Soho in London. It's killing people extremely quickly, and of course, officials are blaming the air. But again, Jon Snow was like, no, I don't think so. So he did the most metal thing ever, and he went door to door in Soho, interviewing people, tracking every single case of cholera and subsequent deaths. He made a map and managed to trace every single cholera case back to a singular water pump on Broad Street, which is sick. I mean, it's bad that people were dying, but it's like so cool that he did that. Later, it was discovered that the well supplying the pump with water was dug literally 3 feet from a cesspit where somebody had washed the cloth diaper of a baby with cholera, which was contracted elsewhere. The wall of the well, the wall of the well, the wall of the well, the well wall, the wall of the well. The walls of the well had started to degrade over time, and the water from the cesspit was leaking cholera-infected water into the well, which was then being pumped up and consumed. Anyways, as Snow was mapping, 3 very large discrepancies jumped out at him. The first 2 were in Soho, one being a workhouse with very few cholera cases despite its proximity to the pump, and the second was a brewery, which had a shocking 0 cases despite the scores of people working there. After a little investigating, however, he discovered that the workhouse had its own water pump that residents would draw water from, and that the brewery workers would drink the ale that they fermented, which had a high enough alcohol content to kill any pathogens in it. The third discrepancy, however, was far more confusing. In Hampstead, several neighborhoods away from Soho, a widow had contracted cholera and died. This single death threatened to disprove Snow's entire theory, but of course, after a little investigating, he found out that she actually had Broad Street water delivered to her house because she preferred the taste, which is where she contracted cholera and later died. Snow eventually linked every single cholera case to the Broad Street pump, and with this information, he lobbied officials to remove the pump handle and subsequently disable the pump. And the outbreak stopped. Like immediately, which not only saved hundreds of lives, but also invented the field of epidemiology and laid the groundwork for Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur to develop germ theory in the late 19th century. Unfortunately, and despite his success, most people ignored Jon Snow's findings because accepting that theory would mean accepting that itty-bitty invisible organisms would cause disease, which of course sounds reasonable to us, but sounded absolutely insane before germ theory was widely accepted. It also had a bad reputation due to a guy a few years prior doing some bad science. Anyways, Jon Snow died 4 years later at only 45 and before seeing any of his ideas fully vindicated. He is of course buried at Westminster Abbey. In conclusion, should you meet your heroes? Unlike Linnaeus or Agassiz, there is no strong evidence that Snow was actually problematic or racist. In fact, his theories about cholera were contradictory to some crazy anti-Asian racism at the time. There are actually a lot of similarities between the public response to cholera and the public response to COVID. The main one being a rise in anti-Asian sentiment and an increase in anti-Asian racism. There's a really interesting paper about that I will link, but I think that being able to recognize patterns of certain diseases being associated with and subsequently weaponized against certain groups of people is more prevalent than ever. So, that being said, He was a Victorian Englishman, meaning he lived inside an empire that was built on colonialism and inequality. There's no record of him being blatantly racist, but there's also no record of him being an activist against those systems either. So he wasn't notably racist by the standards of his time, but he also wasn't out there dismantling injustice. Basically neutral for this era, which is actually a pretty decent historical report card. I would give him a 7 out of 10. I would meet him. Yeah. Shout out Jon Snow. Well, thank you for coming to science class. My name is Elio. This is The Florist. And let me know who or what you want me to talk about next. And yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye. I've been sitting off for so long. Oh my God. Which already makes him statistically unlikable. My fault. Well, statistically unlikable. Chill. Because people believe that the not this belief is also where the oh my God. Basically neutral for his area. Basically neutral for his area.